you very much to the ZKM for inviting me. I must say, after Anna's talk, I feel a little bit inadequate because I fear that I might be one of those people who are only doing make-believe art in my attempts to create imagery or things that look like art. Can we get that on the screen? Or is it not coming up? Ah, here we go. Okay. But yeah, my talk is called Instruments of Creation, and the subtitle is a little bit after Walter Benjamin's quote or book, The Art. Well, it's art in the age of artificial production, because that is kind of the field where I'm heading for in transferring, well, I don't know, is it the agency or the ability of making, well, art or visuals that look interesting to human beings and trying to take myself slowly out of that calculation. So things that I make are looking like this or this. And what all these images have in common is, well, that I actually did not kind of use, well, my mouse or any kind of tools to create these images. So my part in it was training neural networks, maybe picking architectures, choosing the training data, and eventually choosing among the thousands of possibilities the model presents me with, the ones that, well, I found in some way speaking to me. Well, and how I do these things, that's, well, what I will explain to you now. It's, well, not very new that, well, one of the things that define us as humans is our ability to wield tools. And in a way, the evolution of human culture is pretty much parallel to the evolution of the tools that have been at our disposal at a given time. So tools augment our abilities. They enable us to apply more force or less, or control certain forces, like well, a rock or a lever. And tools allow us to build other tools, and with every step in the way, our abilities become kind of more refined and better. And whilst initially tools were only used to, well, to, let's say, do physical things, over time, tools have developed into things that enable us to expand our, well, our mind's capabilities, like calculation and things. And well, now we have, well, computers, and the advent of AI is allowing us maybe to take another step forward, in that it doesn't only allow us to calculate faster or do certain things, but maybe even augment our creativity and our imagination. And there's always this distinction also between tools and instruments. So, because in a way, well, an instrument a musician plays, I also count among the tools, because it enables us to produce sounds or things that, well, that we cannot produce with our body. And in that aspect, I also see myself in a way, like working with neural networks, I see myself as a musician who, well, is also able to build his own instruments, but then first has to learn how to play on them in order to, well, eventually, hopefully, be able to produce a masterpiece or so. Well, as you will see, I think right now we are more in the phase of exploration in this field and trying to figure things out. So I doubt there are yet any masterpieces to be found, but it is a very interesting time to be in, to learn how to wield these new tools. And yes, the tool that I'm talking about is deep learning. And as we heard before, deep learning was mainly invented to turn cats into data. So, and in order to do that, of course, not real cats, but pictures of cats. So in order to do that, we use these, well, various architectures, and one of the more popular ones is a convolutional neural network. Fortunately, I don't have to explain you exactly how this works, because I hope you listened to the other talks before. But well, in the end, it's kind of lots of pixels go in at the top, and in the end, well, the model is able to say, oh, this is a cat or this is a dog, by looking at kind of pixels at different levels of abstraction. So if you look inside, well, when you pass in a cat picture, on the separate levels that exist in these models, well, the information gets more and more reduced. And so whilst in the beginning a model looks more at superficial features like edges and textures, the deeper it goes, the more like these features that it has detected on one level get combined again, and the model makes assumptions about that certain edges might be a certain shape, and the deeper you go, the more, well, it becomes kind of meaning. So something might be, what is at first just a bunch of circles, might be an eye or so. And so, well, in general, there's this idea, so the deeper you go into the model, well, it deals with different things. So initially, well, it's commonly called as style, so everything on the surface, then content, and then just before the model can tell you what it sees there, there's the so-called feature vector, which I find from an artistic point, well, the most interesting thing, because you can see this as kind of a unique address or a unique position of every image you pass in a multidimensional space. And so whilst the model is training, it kind of shapes that space, or in a way it arranges those vectors in a way that later on it can easily make cuts or put hyperplanes between certain, like, well, I don't know, some objects live in this area, like maybe the cats, and the dogs live here, and so it can put a hyperplane between them and say everything that's on the left is cats and dogs. So it shapes this so-called latent space. And, well, because it's multidimensional, we cannot really imagine it, but there are techniques like t-SNE, for example, that allows us to break, several hundred dimensional vector into something two-dimensional that we can see. And what you get is something that looks like landscapes. So this is kind of a map of lots of classified images, and in the way the model has arranged them, in a way it can deal with them. And so if I pass in a cat, it will land somewhere there in, I don't know, Romania or something. So all the cats might be living there, and the dogs might be living in some other area. But it's a multidimensional space, so it's not that easy. So maybe some other images of cats, maybe drawn ones, can be in a different area, and people with cat costumes might be in another one. But overall, it's this continuous landscape. And that landscape now allows you to do interesting things with it. Well, like finding similarities, do actual measures, so you can kind of measure numerically how similar two images are to each other. And then, one of the projects where I used this was something I did in my residency at Google Arts and Culture. It's called X degrees of separation, and it kind of takes on this classical idea of 6 degrees of separation, where you say every human is connected to every other human on the planet by just a matter of like maximum of 6 acquaintances. So I know somebody who knows somebody else, and in the end I'm connected to some person I don't know in China or so. So the idea was, can I do the same thing with artworks? Saying, can I get a pathway from Van Gogh's Starry Night to some sculpture, some Greek sculpture, and what is that pathway? So, like, how can I imagine like two artworks are related to each other? And I decided to entirely ignore all the metadata, saying when was it made, what kind of technique is it made on, who made it, but I focus only on the visual aspects of this. So I use, well, in this case actually the same model that runs Google image search, you know, the one where you drag an image onto and then it will show you all the similar ones. So, well, the benefit of my residency there was at Google is that I can get access to the actual feature vectors, and in a way that is probably one of the most powerful image classification, let's say, models in the world. So it should be pretty good. And so the question is, how does the model that Google runs there look at art or any image differently than we do? And so the way it works, it first measures these feature vectors of all these images, then it connects nearest neighbors together. So I say like, okay, like in a way build a road between every artwork and its 10 nearest neighbors. And what develops is this, it's kind of a road map, and then I can just say, like a car navigator, okay, start here and then find the shortest route to this other artwork. And the way it looks is then this. So I start on the left with a painting and end up with this Buddha statue, and what the model will do is, on the way from A to B, it will look for similarities between the images and find kind of something that looks logical to the machine. And as you can already see, the machine seems to have certain different preferences than us. So one thing, the frame of an image is just as important as what's on it. But it also has a sense for faces and persons and colors. So what you get is something like a multidimensional cut through several categories. What I find interesting about this is that, well, we are more and more digitizing everything. And so we have access to, well, at some point, all the art in the world, or all the data that there is. The problem is, what do you want to find? So usually we know, well, I don't know, everybody knows a few hundred artists, or maybe 100. And then you can start searching there. But you might not even know what you're missing when what is in this data set. And so the idea is you can start with something you know and end up with something you know, but on the way between, you might find things that you didn't even know they exist, but they might have some similarities to something you like. So I like the idea of serendipity and making discoveries in these huge amounts of data. That was mainly kind of the idea of using these networks for classification. For me, of course, it's much more interesting to look at what are ways that I can generate new imagery from data, like with these models. And I made up this term called Norography, and it's actually a term that is, from medicine, but I adopted it now, and it's the idea that these latent spaces, these abstract spaces that these models make whilst we train them, I can go into them like a photographer goes out in the real world, and then I can ask the model, how does it look here? Show me what you see. And just like a photographer framing the world, I can, this looks interesting to me, but let's turn it around a little bit. Let's see if there's anything in there I find, that beautiful, interesting, shocking. So that's kind of the idea. I train the model, go in there, and find something. So the first, of course, I can program, and that's kind of my background too, but obviously there are much smarter people than me, and I'm totally indebted to scientists who actually now more and more share their knowledge and their models and their papers. And so I pretty much profit from this movement. I also profit from ego shooters, in a way. We all do. That's the funny thing, because probably if the whole gaming stuff wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have access to cheap GPUs, which are kind of the working horse of all this. So if kind of GPUs would have only had to be built for scientific purposes, probably we wouldn't have this kind of crazy kind of progress in this field at all. So thank you to, to Doom and co. Anyway, so I take these models, and this, for example, is called, in short, plug-and-play generative networks. And it kind of allows you to, train a model, in this case a classifier, and then ask it from some noise, evolve images that, that maximize a certain output of a category. And then it allows me to fly through this space, and it starts producing these kind of abstract-looking shapes and things, but that is what I find interesting. So it's not total randomness, but they seem to be, we sometimes recognize familiar shapes, and there are interesting color combinations, and, this space is infinite. So, the question is, of course, what to take. And then I can go and, pick some which, I don't know, maybe I find the shape appealing or the color combination. And, and I can infinitely do this. And yeah, these are some early things. So these kind of latent abstracts. What I find interesting is, yes, the model has no intention at all to produce anything appealing to us. So in some aspect, it becomes only a kind of a piece of, I don't know if I call this art yet, but, we as humans, when we look at this, we actually put meaning into it. So I see lots of these as like a kind of complex Rorschach test, where the model offers me something, a lot of things, and, sometimes I see something that speaks to me. So I make up the story in the end. But yeah, we heard the term before, because, of course, progress is moving super fast in this field. So the previous one model is, I think, 2 years old, and you saw that the resolution was rather low and kind of grainy. But oh, actually, it was 3 years old. But so GANs were actually kind of the type of GANs, especially pix-to-pix, is only 1 year old. So I couldn't have done what I'm doing now a year ago. And fortunately, Anna already explained the concept of these two neural networks that are fighting against each other. So I will not explain that again. But yes, I'm also using pix-to-pix because pix-to-pix has a very interesting kind of way of working that I find very intuitive. It works that you give the model, when you train it, two examples. Like one is kind of the input well, it's the input in a way, and the other one is what you expect as an output. So you always give it pairs, and you decide in a way which format your input will be, and that very much shapes what you will get out. So the first thing I tried with this was kind of to do this classic enhance effect that you know from TV, where you have a super blurry image, and then, well, whatever magic technology takes the blurry image and suddenly you see a face of whatever culprit there was. So I tried to train the model on pairs of very blurry images and the real one. And after doing that for, well, a few nights, this is the results I get. So in this case, you see the input on the left, which is this blurry blob. And on the right, you see what the model makes out of it. And yes, definitely not really kind of sharp, but for me, this is much more interesting. I mean, the model makes mistakes and introduces some very interesting, like very new kind of artifact. Yeah, that's my bot running here. So, yeah. So it produces new looking kind of artifacts, which are somewhere between painting and glitch and things. So that is, I find this approach very, like this transformation that the model introduces by, actually it has to invent new information, because in a way the blurred image has very little information, and the one I get out has, well, tries to have a lot of information in there. So by training the model, it will actually, it kind of, yeah, it has to be inventive in some way. So instead of calling it enhancement, I call this technique transhancement, because it transforms and enhances at the same time. And so I can try this on photographs I found, and yeah, it adds kind of a very, well, very creepy, uncanny effect to these images. But yes, so from a novelty character, I must say they definitely are different to something I've seen so far. And well, one of the benefits is I can infinitely kind of zoom into images, and then what was before an eye might become something, well, I don't know yet, but well, definitely interesting looking. So a few more. So, but yeah, as I said before, this was still kind of almost like just adding style to an image. It didn't really produce something new in the content or in the form aspect of things. So, well, the next thing I was going for is that I also want to produce the entire story, or, well, the form of the image, the underlying, well, what controls then the style on top. So one of the ideas is that I train a model, like I train it on stick figures. So if you've been there are models that can, like you give them a photo, and then they will extract a stick figure that delineates where the arms, the heads, and all your limbs are. And you can run that on videos or images you found on the internet, and that way the machine will learn how humans usually are posed, and so it's not random poses. And well, the first thing I can do is I can just pick random poses in this space and interpolate between them, and what you will get out of it is actually kind of that something that might actually look like some deliberate motion, like figures dancing or something, but in reality it is really just flying through this pose space, going through potential ways of how a person can stand. So in a way, it gives me now a way to randomly pose people. And what I do next is I use the same approach with pix-to-pix, and I train it on these stick figures as the input and photos as the output. And what I will get is this then. So on the top left, you see kind of the input I give the model. So it's really just a few points of data. And the output is something that looks painterly, kind of not quite clear what it is. But for me, it has already, well, it's maybe a human could have made it. I'm not sure if that's a good aspect of it, but surely it seems there's some kind of intention behind it. Ooh, 5 minutes left. Okay, so I'll show you a few of those. So again, the way it works, I randomly generate poses or have the machine render them, and the machine gives me these results, which you can find interesting or not. But yeah, so in a way, some of them you might think, well, you might pass even the Turing test in the aspect that, well, if you didn't know it was made by a machine, you could at least suspect that, well, that the human was involved in some way. Oh yeah, I always get, of course there's the problem that you always kind of like reminds me of things. So in this case, I always get, oh, this reminds me of Francis Bacon, so I get that a lot. So it's very difficult to actually still find empty spaces that haven't been traveled yet by previous generations of artists. This is a project where I worked together with Albert Bark-Duran, an artist, who was becoming kind of the slave to the machine, and he painted this on a huge canvas in oil. So we're continuing this project this year in a performance. Again, like questioning, like, who is the agent, who is the executing piece in this. But oh, I still have so much to show, so I have to go faster. The next thing, bodies. Of course, the human face for artists has always been extremely fascinating. So, of course, I also want to generate my own faces. Using the same approach, there are these neural networks that can give you biometrical face markers. So you get 68 points that delineate where are your eyes and everything. And I can train models on these pairs. And so this was a very early one where I trained it on material from the British Library. And so again, you see on the left is the input. I give the model, so I can just shape these markers, and on the right, the model outputs what it has learned. And because it has only seen kind of old engravings, the output will look like that. I applied the same to, like, I can transfer these face markers. Oops. Oh, we don't have sound. It doesn't really matter. So this is called alternative face, and it's kind of Kellyanne Conway saying, giving this infamous interview about alternative facts. And so this was kind of my idea of showing where it will be going, that this is still very rough, but I trained a model on Françoise Hardy, the singer, because I had to train it on video, and mapped then, what Kellyanne Conway says onto her face, deliberately making random camera motions. This was kind of like very, like, I don't know, 3/4 of a year before deepfake, so now we can do it better. But the idea is that, yes, it will very quickly become that we cannot trust images anymore, and even like I can now do that on my own little machine. It's getting better now, so one of the things that I'm doing now is we all work with these tools that, are given to us by the scientists. And, if you just work with the standard tools, it's like going to a shop and buying prepackaged food. So I try to improve those models myself. So right now I'm trying to improve, let's say, texture and hair and things. So not to generate perfect images, but rather I think I first have to get the model to be as perfect as possible in order then to be able to escape it again. And so this is kind of what I'm like, in a way, like an artist tries to find ways how to use a brush. I try to find ways how these models behave. So this is another thing. Of course, I had to try it on, because we have this kind of strange fascination with old white guys and rich old white guys hanging in galleries. So I trained another model on these, on old oil paintings and portraits. So these are actually all generated. And for me, it's actually, again, not the idea to generate more of these, because we already have enough, but figuring out kind of how to train the model right. For example, on top you can see, I don't give the model ears and hair when training, so it has to make all that up, which is like wherever it doesn't get really a lot of information, it makes a lot of mistakes. And the ears are getting better, but I'm still fighting. And now I can also do this in real time. So I feed in a camera, and on the right, the model produces things. And yeah, so the beauty of working with these models is like when they, in a way, do what they are not about to do. So this is kind of where it's getting interesting. And so yes, I have my kind of Francis Bacon for beginners engine here. And of course, well, so it's much more interesting to feed the data with, like the model with data it doesn't expect, because there you get into this space where the model might give you ideas for something to start with and move forward from. I have more, well, in this case, it's actually two models. So one is looking for faces and passes the information to the second model, which is generating faces. So it's two models fighting against each other. And because like, whoa, okay, so, damn, I think, okay, well, I very quickly go, yeah, okay, let's end on this. So it sees faces everywhere. And so, because like it's like that hammer and nail thing, so in a way it allows you to go into very interesting creative avenues. Oh yeah, so, and now, wait a second. Okay, some people say now they see kind of somebody like picking lies. I see kind of Titanic, I don't know. But, and that's what I wanted to say. So in a way, we start seeing things in these stories or something that I wish I could. Well, maybe you ask some smart questions so I can bring that up later on. Because, well, I guess we have to come to the questions. Oh, I underestimated 25 minutes. Oops.
If anyone has questions.
Thanks, it was great. It was wonderful to see such a range of your work as well. It's really enjoyable.
Thank you.
But I don't know if you've thought about this or if you have discussed this with Anna at all. What's really interesting, and also it comes out in the work, one of the works in the exhibition, Constant Dallart's work, which of course is the image that we're seeing all the time on the screen.
Oh yeah, that's mine too, yes.
Yeah, right. So what do you think about the relationship between abstraction as a kind of style, I hesitate to use that word, which seems to be coming out a lot in artists' works that are using models, particularly because you all are interested in exploring spaces like latent spaces and so on, and instability, destabilization, etc., versus this kind of trend towards realism, which of course is very dominant within the mass-produced visuality coming out of deep learning. I just think it's really interesting that this is like a kind of interesting dialogical relationship going on here.
Oh, absolutely. That is kind of the space that I'm navigating, and for me, it's like a gradient in a way. So, and in a way, I look at art from this classical information theory kind of standpoint from the 60s, Abraham Moll, and these people were. I really see art as a kind of a perceptual issue too, and in that aspect. Kind of realism and abstraction are a matter of how much information is in an image. And so from the reward function that you get when looking at things, I think in a way, the more real an image gets, the less degrees of freedom you have in interpretation. So I think that in a way we prefer, let's say, more abstract things because it allows us to discover things. And I think there is this reward for understanding, looking at something and believing that you understood it, or that you understood the story or what's going on. And so I think there's a sweet spot between realism and total abstraction that I try to maximize even, where in my art, and I actually wanted to show you some of those things. So we are here, and these things were, there is some element of realism in there where we recognize certain patterns and features, but then you think you understood it, and like a joke, your expectations are not met. And I hope to trigger some reaction there. So I don't know if that answers the question correctly, but in the end, I think it's really kind of a gradient. There is not like two categories. It's not a binary category. It's so from photo to abstraction, it goes through painting, and it's just always a matter of information content. And so the reason why lots of these GANs remind of us paintings is in a way because the models are coarse in the way these convolutional patterns work. And in that aspect, painting is kind of information reduction because you have like a brush or something which might be rather broad, so you try to make something with the limitations of that tool in a kind of quantization, and so perceptually we look at it and fill in the gaps, which is the pleasurable element about it.
Yeah, but what about what does a GAN want?
The GAN?
Maybe the GAN wants to be more abstract.
The GAN doesn't, the GAN is like the tool. So I can tell the GAN if it wants to go more abstract or not, depending on, the parameters I send in. So if I stay with my input within the expected input, like in what the model has been trained on, it will try to get as exact as possible. It is very limited in its way, and it makes shortcuts. But I still have the option to change the range of input and try to drive it into spaces where it doesn't really have any reference point. So it tries it always will output something, and it's usually then very abstract and might, in some areas, still have elements that remind you of something, or others might just be plain noisy, glitchy patterns. But I think I have it in control in some way. But as I said before, we are just at the point where we learn how to use these things, and one of my motivations is to understand better how they work, at which points I have control, and at which points at which point the model is actually limited in its expression possibilities. The other thing is right now, all of this looks very novel, just because we haven't seen it so much. So we will very quickly learn to understand the language of these images, and then lots of things that we might find interesting now will just become another cliche. And I try to find out what are the cliche elements. For example, GANs produce certain typical artifacts that you will see in lots of the things that people like us are doing. And I'm actively trying to steer away from them. So it's a question if that's a good thing. But also what Anna said before is, right, this might be a very short phase right now that we're in. Because, of course you can deliberately decide that I want to stay in this intermediate aesthetic between something real and not, but over time these models will improve in resolution, in their capability to make things, and then, they can exactly reproduce a painting, but who wants that? So, of course you can always dump down a model. That's what I wanted. So actually, let me quickly go back to that I wanted to show you. So this is actually an example. So on top you have the model trained kind of perfectly. But then I can go and lobotomize the model, and I can turn off the weights. And in a way, just like a human, like the classical examples when people develop Alzheimer or dementia, and artists, they start losing their capabilities and can only focus on certain aspects. The same thing you can do with the model. So we can always go back from the perfect to some spaces that might be more rich in interpretability possibilities.
All right, let's get...
Sorry, that was a long answer.
Let's get one last question. Maybe.
There's a saying that the secret of a good photographer is to take many photos and then to select the good ones. So, yes. Because it's so easy to make photos, a part of the artistic process is just to be an aesthetic filter, so to say. Now, here you have shown a possibility to generate, any kind of visual art very easily or very fast. So something that would take a painter days to create, you can do in real time with maybe 30 frames a second. What will be the impact on art when we can generate this really fast and have something that looks visually appealing but does not have an artistic intent maybe behind coming from the GAN?
Well, that's a question. Yeah, it's a very good question, and I agree. The problem is these things can produce infinite amounts, and in the end, it's just a tiny percentage that is worth keeping. Well, there is, of course, right now we are in this battle for attention. You look through your social feed, and images try to catch your kind of a glimpse of your time, and so in a way, it doesn't matter if you spend 2 months on producing a single image, or if somebody just takes a picture of a cat. In attention economy, it's kind of worth the same, and the other person might just get more, might catch even the eye more. So I'm not sure if that is kind of something to strive for, but in that kind of economy, these models will definitely have an evolutionary advantage, because they can automatically adapt to whatever the current taste, or, well, like they can measure their impact and try to improve their approach. And overall, I hope that, well, usually with competition, well, you have to get better. So if these models are at some point, at least to the majority of people, just as interesting as something a human did, then we have, fortunately, still the ability to adapt ourselves, and we just have to get better. I mean, just being lazy or so will just not work. So well, these things, first of all, open up new ways of seeing, maybe. So you might just say, oh, this is interesting, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Or we just have to find new niches where we can still prevail as with our human creativity. Overall, I believe that, again, it will further in the end, that's what I said at the beginning, like, I think in the end, well, something more will come out of it, I hope. And, well, of course, yes, but again, lots of, let's say, people who are doing pop or mass market art, they might get out of business, or the stuff you can buy at Baumarkt or so. So it is a new competition that will initially just weed out the easy stuff. The difficult stuff will still be left to humans to do. And of course, meaning is completely missing yet. So that is like, if you're looking for meaning in art, or like if you intention, I mean, I can still put the intention in afterwards, but yeah, right now that is, of course, definitely not there at all.
Thank you very much, Mario. Okay.